So yeah, today we're going to be looking at generative AI with Adobe Firefly. So Firefly and Adobe's approach to generative AI, I think, is very unique. And I hope to express that and get it across through both as we go through a couple little slides at first to kind of set the foundation, what we're going to be talking about and going through, but also, the integrations inside of creative design software, traditional, long-standing creative design software that's being infused with Firefly AI. So let's go ahead and get through these slides, and then we'll get into the actual content of the hands-on kind of demo stuff, right? And by the way, if you want to follow along and you don't have an Adobe ID, if you go to firefly.adobe.com and it'll prompt you to create a free Adobe ID where you can use Firefly and you can, download a trial of, things like Photoshop and Illustrator and Express and so forth that we're going to use. So what are we going to go over today? We've got 1 hour. So I hope to hit all these things, right? So a little bit of introduction. We're going to do a overview of Firefly, like what is it, what makes it unique apart from other generative AI. Responsibility and ethics, which is something that constantly comes up, right? So Firefly does have a very unique approach to this particular concern. And then we're going to look at different things. So, aside from just Firefly, like how is Firefly used across other creative software? Because the idea is that Adobe has Firefly as a service, as a generative service in different ways. That's accessible generally through the web browser, again at firefly.adobe.com. And yeah, those particular workflows, techniques, actions, and so forth are dispersed into more traditional creative software like Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and things like that. And also, as we go through here, I do have my eye toward both the chat, if you're in Zoom, but also the Q&A pod. So if you're coming from another platform like YouTube or LinkedIn, I'll be able to see your questions as they pop up in there too. So be sure to ask questions, make comments, however you want to approach this. I'm fine with a more conversational style of going through things here. And we're going to keep this pretty malleable. We'll see kind of where it goes, right? So a little bit about myself. I am an assistant teaching professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and my primary thing that I teach is around creative design software, specifically on Adobe software solutions, but also things like Figma and user experience design and things of that nature. I'm an Adobe education leader and an Adobe community expert. So these are two communities at Adobe, community groups that we work with internationally, big groups of great people. So couple of things, some recent books of mine you can see right here. So I actually published 3 books within the span of a year. These are the 3. We've got books on mastering Adobe Animate 2023, Adobe Creative Cloud Classroom in a book, and a book that I co-authored with my friend Tom Green, Guide to UX Design and Development. I'm also a LinkedIn Learning author. So I've got a bunch of stuff on Animate and Figma and just general topics, Angular, things like that on LinkedIn Learning. So check that out if you're so inclined. All right, so Firefly. Again, Firefly is accessible through firefly.adobe.com in your web browser. And the idea behind Firefly is to improve creative workflows using generative AI, right? How can generative AI be used both as a standalone service, but also, again, throughout more traditional creative software, right? So we're going to have a look at Firefly. Responsibility and ethics is, as I mentioned, very important. It's something that a lot of people are very concerned about when it comes to generative AI, right? So with Firefly, it's actually trained on the models that are being used are trained on Adobe stock images. If you don't know what Adobe stock is, It's Adobe's service of stock imagery, stock photography, stock vector assets, stock 3D models and materials, all sorts of stuff that can be used across different creative platforms, right? So it's trained on all of that stuff. So it's not just scraped off the web like a lot of this stuff is. It's actually, designed to be safe, and it's certified to be safe for commercial use. So you can use content created with Adobe Firefly commercially without the worry that anything's going to happen legally, right? That's negative. So there is also a compensation model for stock contributors. So, it makes sense to, if your art is being used to um, feed the model, to train the model, it only makes sense to give something back to the artist, right? So they do have a compensation model for contributors whose work is used within Firefly to train the models. There's also the Content Authenticity Initiative and the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. So these are a couple things that you can look up on your own and read up what they're all about. I just saw the other day that they've expanded quite a bit for the CAI, and there's also content credentials that we'll see when we get into Firefly. It can be used to tag content to say like this was generated with an AI, it was generated with this specific model, and so forth. So what are we going to cover today? Firefly and Express. So again, Firefly is a standalone thing in some cases, right? Go to firefly.adobe.com, go in there and do things like, type in a text prompt and get a generated image, right? And then tweak that. That's where we're going to start. From there, we're going to look at Firefly within Adobe Express, which is Adobe's all-in-one content creation app. We'll also look at Firefly and Photoshop, which of course is, Photoshop has been used for decades to, create really across all industries, right? To create visual material, still images, graphic compositions, and so forth. It only makes sense to include generative AI inside of Photoshop, but also Illustrator. So when it comes to Illustrator, if you're not familiar with Illustrator, it's used, to create vector graphics primarily. And vector graphics, of course, can be scaled and recolored and all sorts of stuff. Firefly can actually be used to generate vector graphics. So not only bitmap images, but vectors, which I think is a very big deal. And one of the unique things about Firefly is that it does expand, into all of these areas that a lot of other generative AIs either only just kind of touch upon or, you don't explore through that area. A lot of generative AIs, they just produce bitmap images, right? Which is great, and a lot of them do a great job of it. But, having something that works like this and that's integrated in such a way is really powerful. So, well, we're not in closing yet. Let's jump into Firefly. So again, firefly.adobe.com will bring you here. If you're not signed in, you will see a button to sign in or to generate a free Adobe ID that you can use to generate content inside of Firefly. But here, you've got a couple different modules in Firefly. Of course, we have text to image, where you type in a text prompt and you get a bitmap image back, right? You also have generative fill, where you can say like, hey, I want to take this area and I want to fill it in with this content via prompt. You've got text effects, which is kind of interesting. It's a way to stylize fonts, stylize text characters based on a prompt that you give it. Generative recolor allows you to create new color palettes to recolor your vector artwork through a text prompt. Then you have things like text to template, text to vector graphic, which again, we'll see inside of Adobe Illustrator as we go through here. And there are even more things. I'm not sure if they even list the, oh yeah, here they are. And so in exploration, this one really interests me, 3D to image. And we're seeing this come in on a number of different AIs at this point. But 3D to image allows you to place 3D models in a scene. And then based on your text prompt, it will interpret that along with the dimensions of the 3D models, the form of the models, to help guide and create your generative art, right? Sketch to image, you can imagine this is super important for those who like to actually, draw. Start out as a drawing and bring that into an interpretation, which is a bit beyond your drawing there. And personalized results. So being able to teach the AI to produce things per your specific style. This is very important for artists. So people who are creating their own artwork, right? They don't want to use what's been the AI has been trained on, Adobe stock or whatever, right? They want the AI to interpret things through their own particular style. And, that's a great thing to have. There's a little bit of that inside of Firefly right now, but it can, of course, be much improved. So let's go in here and do something that probably everybody is familiar with, right? A simple text to image prompt and see the different controls that are available inside of Firefly. Because Firefly does provide a number of very unique controls in the user experience. So let's go ahead and click generate. So we find text to image here. And also text to image is kind of like the standout module of Firefly. When you enter into here, you can see you can just start out right there, right? But if you go down here, click generate, it's going to bring us to a gallery with a bunch of examples. So these are like starting prompts you can use. So you can see the types, the styles, they vary quite a bit here. You've got simple line drawings, you've got photographic content, highly stylized content, watercolors, all sorts of stuff. So what image do we want to create? I don't know, it was just New Year's, right? So let's say we want to create, a photographic scene of a New Year's celebration, right? Most of the comments in the chat here are all around, Happy New Year, so it makes sense. So let's go ahead and think up just a simple prompt. Let's see, New Year's Eve celebration. Lots of lights and people. Very simple to start, right? Just go ahead and click generate. And here we go. Now we're into Firefly proper, right? And what it's going to do, first of all, is it's going to generate this base set of variants. They're going to be 4 variants, and they're all going to be 1-to-1 squares. There we go. Look at that. It's not too bad. And right, they're going to, it's just a basic interpretation of our prompt. But if we look over on the side here, there are a number of different things that we can tweak in order to steer Firefly further, steer the model into creating exactly what we want with different specifications. So if we look at top here, model version, it's important to note there are 2 different generative AI image models, text to image, inside of Firefly. We have Firefly Image Model 2, which is new. That's the more advanced image model. There's also Image Model 1, which was released last year around like March or so. Firefly Image Model 2 was released at Adobe Max back in October of last year. And it's important to note too that Image Model 2 is only available on the web right now. So if you're using something like Photoshop, to do generative bitmap creation, you're not going to find Image Model 2. It's going to still be Image Model 1, which is kind of a, it'd be good to have Image Model 2 or the ability to change between them. Image Model 2 makes much more detailed photographic representations, right? Image Model 1, it's a first try, first step. It was good, but Image Model 2 is much more detailed. So when that comes to Photoshop, it's going to be absolutely amazing. So we can choose between models there, aspect ratio, right? So it starts out with a 1-to-1 square. I tend to do almost everything with widescreen. So 16:9. So I'm going to switch it to widescreen right now. For content type, we've got it at automatic right now. So based on our prompt, it's going to decide how to interpret it. Is it going to be more artistic, right, with pen and pencil? Look not as photographic, paints, things like that. Or are we going to go the photographic route? In this case, the image model has chosen, based on the prompt, yes, we want to go with photographic content, which, yeah, okay, let's do that. Visual intensity. And notice that each one of these, you've got a little bit of information you can hover over on the side. So here, take the intensity up a little bit. It's going to make the style just more intense. You take it down, it's going to be less intense. And you can play with that to see. It's hard to describe exactly what that means, right? But you can play with it and see the results. Of course, you can always do a one-to-one comparison between these things. So here is the beginnings of how to match the style per reference images, right? So per your own work, perhaps, or something you're trying to match. So here we can upload our own image. And note too, if something that you try to upload is tagged with content credentials saying that, hey, do not use my artwork as a style inside of something that's aware of content credentials like Firefly is, it's going to respect that. And it's going to tell you, hey, you're not allowed to actually use this per the content creator's credentials. So again, part of that responsible way of doing things. So there's a question inside the Q&A pod here. So what's the pricing model? The pricing model on here, it's tied in basically with how Adobe kind of structures their different levels of subscriptions, right? So if you've got like a full Creative Cloud subscription, you get a certain amount of generative credits per month, and it depends on your plan how many you get, right? Generally, it's around 1,000, which is quite a bit. And they renew every month, of course. And that's just part of your general subscription to Creative Cloud. If you're using a free Adobe ID, I think you get a couple of generative credits. I can't quite remember. If you go up here to your little image up here and click on it, you can always access your credits and learn more about the credits pricing model. But even if you have a free Adobe ID, you can still use Firefly. But there are a couple of caveats to that. So one thing is it's going to use it's going to render things in a slower way than if you had a paid subscription. So it's going to take a little longer to render things. And also it's going to put a little water in there, right? So you got a couple of different things going on with that. Again, to learn more about the pricing models of the generative credits and everything, you just click on your little face here and then click off to learn more about generative credits, and that should tell you most of what you need to know. But yeah, definitely it's a tiered system, right? Access to different things is more or less depending upon, of course, how much you're subscribing to, right? So down below here, we have effects. Now, this is kind of interesting. Effects, color and tone, lighting, composition, things like this, they will add specific tags to your prompt down below. And they won't add them as text tags. They'll add them as little badges that you can remove if you wish. But note, like if we choose, this might be, so if we choose bokeh effect, we want to put a bokeh effect on here, right? Notice it shows up right down here, bokeh effect. So we can always remove that particular style, clear all styles, but we could also just type in bokeh effect into the prompt, and it's going to interpret that in a similar way, right? So down here, color and tone, we can tweak this and say like, yeah, I want some vibrant colors here. It's supposed to be very festive. For the lighting, we got things like studio light, surreal lighting, which is one I use quite a bit. Long time exposure, which might be cool. Let's go ahead and choose that. And then composition. How do we want this to look in terms of how it's framed? Yeah. So is it landscape photography? Is it a close-up, a shallow depth of field? Is it photographed through a window? Which is an interesting one. Wide angle, shot from below, from above. You've got all these different items here. Let's go ahead and do a shot from above. That might be kind of interesting for this particular shot. And then you've got photographic settings right here. Right now it's set to auto, but if you are a photographer, if you study photography, there are a lot of different things you can choose here, like what the aperture of your lens is, the shutter speed being used, the field of view, right? So these are all things that, if you want the most control over your photographic image, you're going to want to be able to tweak these things. I'm going to just keep mine on auto right now. And then down below, we get advanced settings, which right now there's only one. And that is, what sort of prompts do you want to use to exclude certain things? Like maybe you don't want fireworks, right? So exclude from image. I don't want any fireworks. No. All right. So another thing before we move on, inside of this prompt, you can see here there is a little toggle for suggestions. The suggestions, of course, are also generated via AI. So if we look at this, right, and we start typing, right, lots of lights and people, we'll just fill that back in. We get a bunch of prompts. So doing their group photo shooting, cheering on the city street, around the beautiful Christmas tree, coming out from the light. That's a weird one. We're just going to go with what we have and click generate. So when we click generate, it's going to take all those choices that we made across, everything on the side here, some of which is represented down here through styles, and it's going to regenerate these things for us. So you can notice, oh, wow, it's really changed things up. So you notice here, right, as it's doing this, it doesn't take very long. So I've used a number of generative AIs that they really take depending upon different things, right? So let's see here. All right. So I'm going to choose one. Let's move on from this initial exploration here. Oh yeah, so somebody mentions that aperture has a very different effect depending on focal length. And there is no option for focal length. Yeah, so these things are still being explored, right? A lot of these options. If you look up here, and this is really good to know, when you see this little beaker, if you click on it, here's a bunch of different things you can do to interact with the Firefly team. So you can submit ideas, suggestions for feature requests, like, hey, why don't we have focal length in here, right? We've got the ability to report bugs, to join the Firefly community, to rate Firefly images, which is pretty cool. This allows you to actually participate as a Firefly user in training the image model, which is neat. And then you've got join the Discord server. It's actually, oh, I can't open it by right-clicking. I don't want to jump off of this screen here. Maybe we'll look at that after we look at some other things, right? So here, lots of people, I said no fireworks, but look at that. We got fireworks in here. Shot from above, I don't think works quite well enough. So I'm going to remove shot from above and regenerate because it's just too busy. There's too much stuff going on, right? And of course, you can spend, a whole hour tweaking these prompts, just like anything else. And there we go. This is a little more what we're looking for here. Let's grab, she's got, this kind of focal point here. Let's grab this. So if I click on this, notice we can flip between the different variants that are being used here. And if we hover over, we can rate the result. We can report it. Like if it generates something that we're like, yeah, probably shouldn't be generating that particular thing, you can report it to the team, right? We can also favorite. So saving it to favorites are going to save the prompt so we can, tweak it later on. We can create new derivative images from this, root image and things like that. Very useful. Also more options. This is where you download it. This is where you can, oh gosh, let me do that again. This is where we can download it. We can copy a link. And this is really interesting. If we copy a link, we can actually share it as an editable prompt to other people, right? So if we want to start with something and we got it really good, you can have like a fun little contest being like, hey, group of friends, let's all see what kind of variants we can get to remix this prompt, right? You could do something like that. We can copy the image to our clipboard instead of downloading it. We can also edit directly inside of Adobe Express, right? So it was mentioned that, yeah, you can do things in Express with Firefly. You can submit it to the gallery. So the Firefly gallery is just a group of curated examples of things you can produce to give people ideas around what they might want to prompt, right? We have save to library. That will save to a Creative Cloud library, the image. So on the other side, you have an edit menu. And inside of here, there are different things that you can access within Adobe Firefly. So things like generative fill, show similar, uses style reference, and also a couple of direct interactions with Adobe Express. And by the way, Adobe Express is also a web-based service. So just like Firefly, you access it through a web browser. Remove background, apply filters and adjustments, add text. So just like very simple little things that you might want to do if you don't want to bring it into Photoshop or something and do all that stuff. Let's click on a couple of these. So we got show similar. Show similar is going to take the image that we chose as our number one variant, and it's going to generate a couple of other variants that are similar to it. So there's a question, if no opinion, but if so, how do you have any opinions on Firefly versus other text-to-image Gen AI models like Stable Diffusion or DALL-E? So yeah, I mean, of course, of course I have opinions, right? Everybody's probably got lots of opinions if you've used like more than one of these things, right? I mean, honestly, like when it comes to something, I've used a number of things. I've used DALL-E, I've used Midjourney. I think Midjourney, don't kill me, Adobe. I think Midjourney has probably like the most like incredible results. Firefly Image Model 2 is good, right? But some of the stuff you can get from Midjourney is very, very, very nice, right? And also Firefly, this is a good thing to point out. And it goes back to ethics and responsibility, right? So if you type in, right, if you want to see like Mickey Mouse, right, doing something, or Homer Simpson or some kind of trademarked character, you're not going to get it with Firefly. They have blocked all of that stuff. So you can't use trademarked characters and things like that. If you choose to do something in Firefly where you say like, I want to see this in the style of, this particular artist, it's not going to do it. It's going to be like, yeah, no. Same thing with if you try to do something with violence, with blood, things like that. Firefly is going to be very reluctant to render anything. Like for instance, and people, so if I just say people with guns, right? Firefly is going to get very angry at me. Watch what happens. Firefly's like, what are you doing? You can't render that, right? So it is a bit more restrictive. Now, if you did that in Midjourney, let's say, you'd probably get exactly what you want. You could have Mickey Mouse and Homer Simpson, having you know, a duel with firearms, no problem. But here, not quite. It is restricted based on ethics and responsibility, right? Which, there's opinions about that. So that's, a whole other bag of opinions right there that you can get into with this stuff. When it comes to um, quality, that really depends, right, on exactly what you're looking for. So there's an approach too that differs between how you access these things, right? So something like Midjourney, you're going to access through Discord server. I believe they do have a web interface now, right, as well. And something like Stable Diffusion, you've got a number of different ways to access the stuff. You can always download something like Diffusion Bee and just do it locally, which is how I primarily have used Stable Diffusion. But there are many, many interpretations of all of these things. So I think that, definitely shapes your opinion of what is more or less useful. Again, one of the nice things about Firefly is it does have this very, nice user experience. The UI is very easy to use. And it's something that people are used to if you're used to dealing with creative design software, things like sliders and, drop downs and things like that. So let's regenerate because I show similar again. Yeah, yeah. So it's mentioned both in the webinar chat and the Q&A pod about um, licensing around Steamboat Willie and Disney and everything. And it's interesting. That's like the big thing people are talking about. Like as we get into the new year, it's a funny thing. Anyway, so if I want to grab this, right? So watch what happens, right? So if I go through, so there's a question about licensing rights. I have no idea when it comes to it. I know you can use it commercially, stuff you generate in Firefly. In terms of licensing and ownership, that's something I would say like ask your lawyer. I'm not going to say a thing about that. So here, if we say download, here we go, promoting transparency in AI. So it's talking about how your content is going to be tagged, it's going to be branded, metadata will be injected right into your file as content credentials. And yeah, they're not perfect, right? Of course, things can be removed, but it's a step in the right direction in terms of saying like, especially right, if you're trying to generate through AI something that's meant to deceive, right? It's good to have content credentials in there because that's just one more step to avoiding that sort of deception. So I'm going to click continue here, and it's going to download it to my hard drive, right? But also, what if I want to add something to this, right? And I could go into the prompts and say like, like add a balloon. People, I don't know, maybe people use balloons somewhere at New Year's, right? I could say that, but the AI is going to be like, I don't know. Yeah, so there's a message. If you remove the bokeh effect, they'll be better. And I agree with that. Sometimes the bokeh really does go overboard. So let's go ahead and do that to see what the difference is, right? And yeah, so there we go. Got a bunch of stuff. Let's grab this one. I like this one the best because it doesn't show anybody straight on, but it's still people there. Let's go ahead and edit. And I want to access generative fill, right? That brings us into a completely new thing here where you have really a interface that's sort of akin to, something you would see usually inside of Photoshop, right? So we have over here the ability to insert or remove objects, to pan the image around. And then down here in the toolbar, we have different ways of working with that. So for instance, if it rendered somebody here, a person, not that great. Let's go ahead and say remove, right? Here we brush over the person we want to remove, the object we want to remove, whatever it is. And then we get this basically a selection. We're saying, I want to remove what's underneath these pixels right here. And I'm going to say remove. It's going to create a couple different variants for me. And again, once we see Photoshop in a few minutes, things are going to be very similar to what we see here. So there we go, right? We can see as we click through these variants, how it's removed. And that one's probably the best, right? We can click more if we want to. And when we're finished, when we're happy with it, we can say keep. We can also say we want to insert objects. So same kind of deal. You just kind of brush over where you want to add some kind of an object. And we can say here, maybe in this area here, we want to insert an object. And then again, we're going to be prompted to exactly what we want to do, right? So I'm going to say here, let's see, giant panda with a top hat. And let's generate. So pandas, right? They absolutely can celebrate the new year too. All right. So we've got these different variants, right? I think I probably like that one the best. He's just coming over the roof. And yeah. So we're going to keep that. And of course, we can then download this one too. And it's going to apply content credentials. Continue. Wonderful, right? Cool. So let's go back from generative fill. I'm going to go back out here. Now, if we create something like, where are we? Oh, we're in generative fill still. So let's just create something very quickly, like this one right here, generate. All right. So if I want to take something like this and I want to do just a couple little things to it, right? This is kind of where something like Adobe Express would come in. As mentioned, Firefly as an image model, as a generative AI, exists primarily on the desktop, but it's not constrained to the desktop in this way, right? Adobe is getting Firefly into all of their desktop applications and the remainder of their web-based applications as well. And Express is actually the first thing that they started integrating this stuff with. So if we go again to the edit menu, got like this guy here, edit, right down below. If we want to just like add some filters, make some brightness adjustments, contrast adjustments, we can do it through there. We can remove the background, add text, whatever we want to do. Let's open this up inside of Express. So as soon as I click any of those options, Adobe Express comes up. And again, Adobe Express is Adobe's all-in-one editor. So you can edit images, video, add animation to things, audio in a very, very basic way inside of Express, add text to things, do things like, erase objects, remove background. So you can see like right here, generative fill. Like if I say, yeah, I want to add a generative fill to this, oh, we don't want to do that. It's gonna overwrite what we have. Say done. And instead of doing that, let's go ahead and just add a basic shape, right? So if we add just a shape right here, change it, and then go back to something like media, right? We got something like text to image right here. So with this guy selected, text to image, what do we want? I would add a new one. That's okay. We can say like little kitty cat wearing futuristic armor, right? And let's just generate. You can see down below here, text to image and Express shares a lot of the prompts and options like that we have. Yeah, which one do we like the best? I think that one is going to work very good on him. I don't know. That one's really cute too. So yeah, I'm going to say like, yeah, let's go with that one. And then we go back here. And of course, we can do things like remove the background because right now it's got a background to it. If I choose remove background, there we go, right? And of course, I can move this around. We have things in Express like layers. So it is very easy to work with. Let's rotate that guy a little bit. And like I mentioned, we could add a little bit of text to here. We could make some adjustments in terms of, how the image looks, brightness, contrast, and so forth. And you can, of course, download your image right from here. So grab it as a ping, a JPEG, whatever you might want. There it goes, right? So thing to remember, of course, is anything that you do with AI, like this kitten, inside of Express is still going to be using image model 1. It's not using that advanced image model yet. Same thing with Photoshop. So, what's the next step, right? How do we go beyond Express? Of course, we go beyond Express by using something like Photoshop. So let's jump over to Photoshop. There we go. Adobe Photoshop, right? So Photoshop is something everyone is familiar with, whether you are a graphic design expert or just somebody who, you know, is just out in the world, right? Everybody knows the term Photoshop. Everybody knows what it's for. So it's an bitmap image editor, basically. And what we're going to do is pull in a photo. So I have this photo right here that I downloaded from Adobe Stock. It's a basic photograph of, an autumn scene. Looks like it might be Switzerland or something. You get some craggy peaks in the background. You've got your tree and so forth. So what we're going to do is just zoom out a little bit here. And what if I'm preparing something? Now, I teach advertising, PR, and media design students at the University of Colorado Boulder, right? And a lot of the stuff they will need to do is to prepare, ads and concepts and things like that. And they might have an image to work with like this, but it's like not perfect. Where it's like, oh, we want to put the text in, but we want to put the text in, right? Copy over on this side of the tree. And we want to crop it here. Like, we can't send somebody back to Switzerland to actually achieve this. What do we do, right? So this is where Firefly can come in with Photoshop. So if I go in here, I got all my different tools. I'm going to choose my crop tool. And note the crop tool, when we hover over it, it gives us a explanation of how things work. It tells us here, the crop tool can trim or expand the edges of an image. So if I choose that tool, we get our little crop here. And there's a number of different ways to go about this, right? So I could go through and say like, yeah, I want to crop this in a certain way, like that. Let's say 16 by 9, because that's what I really want, right? And this is what we want for our content. We want the tree to be more aligned to the left, right? We want it to be closer, aligned to the left. And we want to put stuff where you see white right here beyond the borders of our content. And normally this would be a real pain to try to achieve, right? For something that's this detailed and photographic, you would need to send somebody out to take the photo. So what would we want to generate? Note it mentions here that this is optional. And as I hover over it, we get a tooltip that says, if we leave this blank, they're going to fill it in automatically. And that's what we want. We want Firefly and Photoshop to interpret what needs to fill in to those extra spaces that we've opened up based on the current existing real pixel data that we have there, right? So if I leave it blank and hit generate, it's going to do just that. It's going to go ahead, use Firefly to generate that content along the side. No, I don't want to see any of that. Continue to videos. I don't want to continue the videos, guys. Huh, I'm not sure exactly what happened here. It got very weird. Didn't it? Wow. This is not the ideal time to have something bug out on me, is it? Let's try it again. I'm gonna do an undo. That's a Command Z or Control Z until we're back here. What is this? Why do we have this here? Very weird. Yeah, well, it does look good, the navigator panel, but unfortunately, I've got this item right here that's not quite. Let's open it up again. Bring it into another document. No, I don't do that. Open in Photoshop. Oh my gosh. Photoshop is just not. It's funny that everything went really well until we started using Photoshop. Let's close Photoshop and restart it. This usually works awesome. Yeah, Harry mentions would close Photoshop and start over. Yes, let's do that. All right, I'm going to open up that image with Photoshop once again. And hopefully that scrambles any little bugs that come up here. All right, so let's try that again. I'm going to zoom out a bit. Let's choose our crop tool just like we did before. Then we're going to say like, oh, no, stop it. Cancel. Crop. So something like this, right? That's about how we had it. All right, generate. These work. Yeah, so somebody mentions that they had this in their Photoshop, but there we go. Perfect. It worked. Somebody mentions they had this and it went away. Yeah, I mean, you could always try to update your Photoshop and see what happens. Some of these things can be controlled by your administrator as well if you are behind like a corporate enterprise account or something, right? So there are a number of possibilities there, but the first thing I would check to see is that you have version 2024 on there. But yeah, we get the same sort of thing. We get a couple of variants. What do we want to see? I don't know, first one looks good. That's fine. So notice what happens inside of Photoshop is it creates a new special layer type, which is a generative layer. So you can create many different generative layers in Photoshop. So like if we make a selection, right, over here, generative fill for that selection, I want to say man in a dark suit with a walking cane, right? Let's generate a little man right there. See if this happens. You can see here, it's created another generative layer for us, right? And the nice thing about generative layers, whereas when you're inside of Photoshop, when you're inside of Firefly and you're going through and, creating things, yeah, you can favorite things, but, once you're gone from that session, it's kind of like, you don't have a lot of control over how things appear. This is Photoshop. So you have access to all the different tools in Photoshop and also these generative layers, as you can see here, you can always tweak them. So if I click on this one, the man with the suit, zoom in a little more. So we got the man with the suit here. We have a number of different variants for that too. So we got this guy here, we got this guy. I like the first one the best. Oftentimes the first one is going to be the best, but not always. So this all gets preserved. So if I click on any of these layers, even if I quit out of Photoshop and open this like 10 days later, I can go in here and be like, yeah, let's change it to a man in a light suit. And you can do that, right? Yeah, the shadow isn't quite there. It actually does do a pretty good job of generating shadows, but that is also based upon your see, we get more variants. So that's actually based more upon your content. So I've generated things before in Photoshop like this where I've had a bigger box to generate, and sometimes it does generate the shadows very nicely. Other times it doesn't. So hopefully, right, when they integrate the new image model inside of Photoshop, we'll have a better time with that, right? But there's a couple examples of what you can use Firefly for inside of Photoshop. And I know we're up on time here, so I'm going to jump into Illustrator. So Adobe Illustrator, again, this is one place where, Firefly is very interesting in the different ways that Adobe is trying to use it to do things, right? And you can see this opens up right now, Generative AI in Adobe Illustrator. So if I go into my Illustrator documents here and I'm like, hey, I want to generate some vector graphics. Yeah. Um, if I just create an object here, just a very basic rectangular vector object, notice inside of my 3D materials panel, we don't need that. So if I go into my properties panel here, and I've got that vector object selected, the most basic vector object, right? It's just a vector with an appearance of a stroke and a fill. We can use that to create our prompt. So here, this is kind of interesting. We have a drop down where we can help define exactly what kind of thing we want to create, right? So to steer our prompt in a better way. So here we've got the choice. Do we want to create an object, right? Subject. We want to create a scene, an icon, or a pattern. So these are common things that you can do, right? That you would do inside of Illustrator with vector graphics. I'm going to say we want a subject. I want to create, something. So what do we want to create? 2024 is the year of the dragon, right? So I'm going to say simple baby dragon, right? Very simple prompt here. And then underneath, you've got things like a style picker, excuse me, a sample prompt that you can start with, different settings. So how much detail do you want when it draws out these paths of your dragon, right? So maybe I'll take it down to like 2. I want a simple dragon, right? I don't want anything crazy. Let's generate. Wait for it to generate our baby dragon. And you can see it's starting to come up here, right? Right. So this is very cool. This is something that like a lot of other AI do not do, is create vector content. And of course, because it's vector, you can scale it up or down, however you want. It's not going to lose any quality. You can go through and recolor it if you want to. So going through here and just choosing specific items, specific parts, you can choose to recolor. However, if I actually select this artwork here, there is a way to recolor the artwork as well based on prompts. You can see right below here, we get a recolor prompt. And if I choose that in our contextual content bar, I can switch from recolor to generative recolor, and then I can put an AI prompt in there. Firefly will recolor all of our vectors based on that prompt. And of course, it's blinking at me. Of course, we've got different options down here, different presets. So I'm just going to click on a preset. And yes, I agree. And let's see what we get for our dragon to be recolored. Yeah. Cute. And again, this is vector, right? So wonderful. All right. So let's see what else we got here. Just chatter about the shadows. Yeah. All right. Well, we are at 4 minutes. So let's take this time, right? If anybody has any questions about anything beyond what we've already done, if anybody wants to make any comments, any pieces of feedback around this stuff. And, Adobe's only been working this stuff into their content since like March of last year. So it hasn't even been a year yet. And we've got some really interesting things for creatives and designers and artists and so forth. And I hope this was interesting for everybody. I think it's a really unique approach to generative AI, being spread out across so many different avenues and so forth. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Beverly. There's a question from Katie. Do the vectors created in Illustrator also contain the code that shows it is AI created? I don't think so, Katie. I'm not quite sure about that. Um, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. I think that's mostly around bitmap images. Yeah, because vectors are just right. You could always, export as an SVG or something, and then open it up in a text editor and see if there's anything in there, right? There may be, but I haven't looked into it. All right. Well, thanks everyone.